All right, so today we're going to be talking about chromosomes, the cell cycle, and cell replication. So I'm going to need your undivided attention. So today we're just going to start off with an inspirational quote to kind of get off on the right foot. We're going to review what cells are made of, and then we're going to go into the cell cycle um, and chromosomes and all the confusing stuff about chromosomes. So just remember to keep your chin up. They'd kill to see you fall. All right, so when we talk about cells, we talk about the most basic unit of biology, right? So you should have learned like all the characteristics of biology. Um, Things got to have like an ion gradient across the cell membrane, the ability to use energy, um, genetic information that can be passed on. Like there's all these characteristics. There's like 7 of them. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. Um, But the cell is the basic unit that can accomplish all of those characteristics of biology. Um, and the cell has all these organelles, right? So you should have learned about like the mitochondria, the ribosomes, the endoplasmic reticulum. There's the plasma membrane, right? Inside the plasma membrane is the cytoplasm, right? But one of the more important organelles is the nucleus, and that contains all your DNA. So when you look at a DNA strand is wrapped around these things called nucleosomes, and then nucleosomes condense further into 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 these things called chromatin. So chromatin is like a condensed form of DNA. It's like packed in tightly so it can fit all inside the nucleus. There's like a thing like if you unwound all the DNA, it'd be like the size of a football field or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it's like a super stupid long piece of DNA, but it's so compact that it can fit inside a single cell, right? And it fits all inside of just the nucleus of the cell at that. So actually, these are what actual cells look like if you look at a microscope. So this is what I work with a lot. These things called fibroblasts. But you can see right here, this blue right here is the nucleus, and the nucleus is stained blue. And then all around it you can see, so this is like where the cytoplasm and all the organelles are. So they're all very small. You can't see any organelles because they're too small for the naked eye. You can only really see the nucleus. Um, but here in red is actually these the microtubule network. In red are these things called actin, and then in green, or no, sorry, green is actin, red are these things called microtubules, and so you can actually visualize what the cells kind of look like. So that's interesting. But aside from that, we're going to talk about the cell cycle. So multicellular organisms, people or multicellular organisms, they must multiply from a single cell into 2 and 3 and the millions of, or maybe even billions of cells that make up a person, right? To do this, they have to go through the same process repeatedly, and that's just divide, right? So every person starts off as 1 cell, and it divides into 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then 32, 64, 128, right? So on and so forth until you have the billions of cells needed. And these cells start to specialize and differentiate. But they all go through the same process, and that's just a cycle of replication. All right, and so this cycle of replication is called the cell cycle. And so these cell cycles are broken up into 5 phases. All right, and we're going to talk about them more detail here. So the first phase is called the G1 phase, or growth 1. And it is where just the cytoplasm, the organelles, they all divide, right? And so for you to have 2 cells, right? Let's say you have 1,000 ribosomes in 1 cell. Well, if you split off and you just gave 500 to one, 500 to the other, well, then you can't do what ribosomes do, right? Make proteins as well. And then if each one of those split off and have 250, well, now you can do it even worse, and then worse, and then worse, right? You're splitting up all these components to where you don't have enough for each cell. So what the cell does is it just replicates all of the cell components right beforehand, right? And so you take 1,000 ribosomes in this cell. Well, what you do is you create 2,000 ribosomes, or mitochondria, or whatever it is, and then you divide into 2, and each one gets 1,000. Now each one has 1,000, and it's good to go. and then you repeat that process to where every single cell in your body has 1,000 ribosomes, or whatever number that is. So every organelle and the whole cytoplasm, so all the proteins that you need for like glycolysis and stuff, those get replicated as well. Everything gets replicated, everything except for the nucleus. So that's a little trick question that teachers love. So in G1, everything replicates except for the nucleus. Now after G1, we continue into this thing called S phase, and S stands for synthesis, and that's because that's where DNA synthesis occurs. So this is where you don't replicate the nucleus. So you still have one nucleus, you just have twice the amount of DNA inside of that nucleus. So just you replicate the DNA, but you still have one nucleus. Next is this thing called G2, and what you do is you just make sure there's a ton of DNA in each cell, and so you need to proofread everything to make sure it's all replicated properly and you don't have any mutations, so you don't get all weird and stuff. You just make sure everything's good, and then once everything's good in G2 phase, then you can proceed further into this thing called M phase, which stands for mitotic phase. And we're going to talk about mitosis in great detail in the next video, but this is the process by which cells separate the DNA into two new cells and then divide the two new cells into two new cells. And there ultimately comes a process where you like stop and you're like, okay, we have all the cells we need as an adult. Let's stop growing and just all the cells chill. And that chill phase happens during G0 phase or G0. And so those are the 5 phases of the cell cycle. So before we go further, we really got to tackle this very confusing concept of DNA and chromosomes. And it's confusing, so you got to stick with me here. All right. You know, they want to see you fall. So DNA gets wrapped up into these things called histones, and you form you just compact these things more densely into these things called a chromatin. And you have to know chromatin. You don't have to know histones, but you have to know chromatin. And chromatin exists inside the nucleus. Now, this chromatin can condense even further into these things called chromosomes. All right? And chromosomes have kind of two parts. Two parts that you have to know, at least. This region called the centromere, and that's just the center of the chromosome. And then this thing called an arm, which has a lot of the genetic DNA. So this is where things start getting confusing. So if you have a chromosome, if you remember back in the cell cycle, right, we have before the DNA synthesis and after the DNA synthesis. So G1 and G2. So in G1, all of your chromosomes look like this because these things aren't replicated. So each chromosome has this thing called a chromatid, and this is just a subdivision of the chromosome. So before S phase in G1, each chromosome has one chromatid. So chromosome, one chromatid. But after division, these things are still connected at the centromere, at the middle of the chromosome, and so you have 2 chromatids on one chromosome. So they call these 2 chromatids sister chromatids, and they're called sister chromatids because these things are absolutely identical in every single way. So they have the exact same genes, the exact same traits. Everything is the exact same on sister chromatids. And that's an important thing to know, is that everything is just, this is a replica. This is the same piece of DNA just replicated, and then they are attached at the centromere. Now, I make this big distinction here because we go into the confusing stuff. So every human has 46 chromosomes. All right. And so we have this thing. It's just a picture of all your chromosomes. It's called a karyotype. And so this right here, right, is one. These are not sister chromatids. This right here is a chromosome, and this right here is a chromosome. Each one of these chromosomes, if you could like zoom in, let's see if we can zoom in or make this bigger. If you just look at one chromosome, you can kind of see, you see like two little red dots here. Each one of those is a separate sister chromatid. So there's two sister chromatids on this one chromosome and two sister chromatids on this other chromosome. And that's important because, so this is one chromosome and this is another chromosome, right? And so if you count this, so blah, 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 I'm counting, boom, 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 45, 46. So we got 46 chromosomes if you were to count all this, right? Now, what's important is that half of your chromosomes came from your mom and half of them came from your dad, right? So this one came from your mom, this one came from your dad. This one came from your mom, this one came from your dad. This one came from your mom, this one came from your dad, and so on and so forth. Now, the thing is that this chromosome and this chromosome, they code for similar traits, but have different things called alleles on them. We'll talk about this more later, but they code for similar traits, whether it be like eye color, hair color, the shape of your nose, the size of your lips, like whatever. They code for different traits, but your mom might have thin lips and your dad might have thick lips, or your mom might have blue eyes and your dad might have brown eyes, right? And so these two chromosomes code for the same characteristic but have two different alleles on them. And so they call these things that code for the same trait but different alleles homologous chromosomes. And so you have to know the difference between two homologous chromosomes and two sister chromatids. This sister chromatid, and we'll get to it here. So this is a nice little example. So let's say that eye color is coded on chromosome 1. So let's look at these two chromosomes. Both of them are called chromosome 1 because they're homologous chromosomes. Chromosome 1 codes for eye color. So that means this little band right here is eye color, whether it's from your mom or your dad. If you have, and even before cell division or DNA replication, right, this band codes for eye color, eye color, eye color, eye color. Now, what happens is that this chromosome, they're homologous chromosomes, but one might code, but this region right here codes for brown eyes because you got it from your dad, and this one codes for blue eyes because you got it from your mom. And then what you do is that you only express one of these, so you're only going to have like either blue eyes or brown eyes. And so this the trait is called the eye color, right? So these things code for the same trait, eye color. Homologous chromosomes code for the same trait, eye color, but different alleles. This one is brown eye color and this one's blue eye color. Now, two sister chromatids are the exact same, so they're both going to code for blue eye color, right, at this spot. So you need to know the distinction between. So it's all these stupid vocab, like it's just stupid that they always chose the same freaking letter for everything, right? Everything starts with a C, right? Chromatin, chromosome, chromatid, sister chromatids, homologous chromosomes, the centromere, and then later we're going to learn about the centrosome and the centriole, and it's just all depressing. And sometimes you just kind of get down on yourself. And so what I like to do is I like to play here. I like to play this song called Tub Thumpin' by Chumbawamba, another C word, and just kind of lift your spirits to where you can kind of get through all this. So go ahead and read all this to clarify any vocab, and then I'll play you out with some motivation to get through all the confusing vocabulary.